Hey there, and welcome to the Brandon Sneed Show, a podcast where we're telling stories about people across all levels of sports, art, and entertainment, from world famous all-time greats to local legends and everyone in between, covering where people are now, how they got here, moments along the way they weren't sure they'd make it, and the things that helped pull them through. I'm your host, Brandon Sneed, and you can find links to and information and updates about the podcast, the guests, and bonus material about all of this by subscribing to my newsletter at my website, brandonsneed.com. Thank you for being here. And today we have episode 4, and our guest is Hugh Howey, who went from working in a bookshop to making 6 figures a month as an independent self-published author. He has become one of the most remarkable stories in publishing. He's built himself a full-blown independent publishing empire at this point as the author of dozens of science fiction thrillers and other books. Perhaps most famous of which is his Wool Saga, which is about a post-apocalyptic community living in a massive underground silo and is now being made into a massive television series. And so we get into all of that and much more, such as the nature of being a writer and an artist, the importance of finishing projects that you start, and how common it is for artists to have, a million things that they've started that kind of languish for years on end. And also about his remarkable life. He's been a bit of a nomad. He, just for one example, built his own sailboat that he lived on for a long time and took all the way around the world. He does Burning Man every year, and he recently got engaged after a whirlwind romance with a woman that he spent, crammed into a small boat cabin with on one hell of an excursion. So we get into all of that. Great story, great guy, incredibly kind. Take the time to talk about all of this. I learned a ton, and I think anybody who wants to know how to make it as an artist will learn a lot. And again, just incredible story, Hugh. So thanks again to Hugh for being here, and we'll jump into it with him from here. Thanks. Where are you now?
I'm in New York.
Is that like home base for you now?
I guess it's home base. My fiancée Shay, her home is in Edinburgh, so we'll be back and forth. But yeah, we're just trying to figure out where to be. But we're such vagabonds. We've been on the road a lot.
Yeah, I've followed your career since, probably 10 years ago now, or 8 something. I don't know, something like that. So it's been really cool to watch everything develop. I'm actually low-key an aspiring self-publishing mogul myself. It's something I've always wanted to do, and it's something I'm starting to actually take some steps towards. Hopefully by the end of this year, next year, be putting something out. But it's just been amazing to watch you do your thing with it, so it was cool. And then
Thanks, man.
Yeah, all the vagabonding is a whole other thing. But congrats on the engagement, man. That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I pinch myself every day that I found someone like this and get to spend the rest of my life with her.
How long have you known her?
Oh, not long, like 3 months.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
When you know, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You were married before, right?
What's that?
You were married before, right?
Never been married. I was in a 13-year relationship where we talked about each other as husband and wife, but we never had a ceremony. She never wanted to get married or have kids, so I respected that.
Yeah. And then I remember, I think it was Wayfinding. You were talking about trying to get married in that one area you're going around. I forget the name of the place.
Oh,
now.
Providencia. Yeah.
Providencia.
I wanted to stay there so badly. I was willing to marry someone just to get my Colombian residency.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I remember that story making me laugh. Then the ex-boyfriend, I think, showed up and talked her out of it.
Yeah, she got cold feet.
Yeah,
probably for the best. It was hard to leave. Like, something I've learned, leaving an island you love is really difficult, but then you get to the next place and it's also amazing.
Yeah,
you realize if you hadn't left the last place, you would never have found this new place.
Yeah, that was kind of the point of that story from what I remember is as much as you love somewhere, sometimes you just gotta go. And then there's always something great waiting down the road.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities with my writing career. I was really
Yeah.
um, infatuated with the first character that I came up with and kept writing sequels for that character.
That was a mollified.
Yeah, and it wasn't
Yeah.
until I started breaking out and writing other stuff, which is so difficult because once you're comfortable with one world and a group of characters, it feels like the plots just write themselves.
Yeah.
Starting from scratch is really difficult, but if you don't do that, you might not find the story that's gonna, make your career.
So, I will record an actual introduction before all this, but we're already talking about some good stuff. So just to lay the groundwork here, how much time do you have, first off?
Probably I've got something else right after 9 o'clock.
Okay.
So we could go till 9 if you want.
Yeah. Great. I'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, I mean, what were you were working in a bookstore, I think, at the time when you were writing the Mollified, your first novels, and then eventually Wool, which became the breakout hit. But what were you doing as you were working on those?
Um, so before I wrote my first book, Molly Fied, when I was kind of unemployed. I was trying to help a friend with his website. I was
Mm,
writing book reviews and interviewing authors for his crime website. Um, Before that, I was pulling wire for a high-end audio video company. Really, a tiny, tiny business, just owner operator with 3 employees, and we were installing like home automation and high end. But the most of what I was doing was like crawling through attics and basements, pulling
yeah.
wire from one room to another. Before that, I spent 2 years roofing, and I got into all these like construction trades after spending um, about over 10 years in the yachting industry,
Yeah.
driving yachts, which paid well and sounds glamorous, but was really difficult to like, be at home with your family every night. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed getting into some trades that allow me to just work like 9 to 5 and be home.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think most of the stories that I wrote early on, I dreamt up while I was spending those 2 years roofing. Like I thought of the
Yeah.
mollified character, and I thought of the first bits of wool and the plagiarist, some of those stories. Um,
How old were
and
you at the time when you were doing the roofing and starting to think about these things? I mean, did you always wanted to write? I mean, I think I read in one old interview of yours that, excuse me, I read in one old interview that you started writing something around, 13 or so.
yeah, I was 12. I actually just found
12.
that book. I was cleaning out my storage unit yesterday, which I managed to empty and get rid of a lot of stuff. But I found in a box the printout of
Yeah.
the first story I tried to write when I was like 12 years old. It's on continuous feed printer paper. It's getting yellowed, and man, I can't believe somehow that piece of story has followed me from like home to home
Yeah.
for decades now.
What's it about?
Uh, it was I don't know if I can't remember the character's name. Um, Complete ripoff of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. When you're that age, I think I've seen this
Mm,
with other kids that age too. You read something you love, and then you start writing almost
yep.
identical story. So what felt very inventive to me at the time was
Yeah.
like very derivative. But this guy uh, wakes up, has like a typical. I mean, that's like the most cliche start to a story you could possibly have. He falls in a hole in his yard and ends up inside the massive spaceship that is Earth, and it was like a defense drone that was set up by a really ancient civilization,
Yeah.
and he wakes the ship up and it kind of sheds its all this moldy growth that's on it, which is basically the world that we love.
Yeah.
So he ends up like kind of destroying the world and setting off on these crazy adventures in this spaceship that's about the size of the Earth.
Oh, that's
But
wild.
yeah, playing
Yeah.
chess with this bedpan and weird stuff like that. Like whatever dumb thing I could think up,
Oh
in
man,
there.
that's amazing. That just reminds me. I remember doing the exact same thing with some just silly kids books. And then I remember I was probably 14, 13 or 14 when the first Spider-Man movie came out, Tobey Maguire, and I went home and wrote an X-Man novel that was, essentially a ripoff of
Yeah,
Spider-Man.
of
It
course.
was great.
People are sensitive about that in writing, but for some reason, we all do that in other art forms. Like if you learn
Yeah,
a musical instrument, you learn to play existing songs first.
yeah,
If you're learning to paint, you paint the same still lifes that everyone else has
yeah.
painted and draw the same portraits and um, body figures. And in writing, I think we should celebrate people doing the same thing. You kind of like you stretch your muscles by playing the hits and writing stuff
Yeah.
that's been written before.
I mean, I think that's how you learn almost anything that's performative or probably anything. And I mean, think about basketball players, they copy, I grew up
Yeah,
trying to copy Michael Jordan's shot. Kids now are jacking threes from 40 feet away because of Steph Curry. I mean, it's you grow up kind of copying the stuff that you love, and that's how you learn if you can actually do it and how you get better and better at it. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. But
exactly.
so you've always been really into like the far out sci-fi stuff, though.
Before I got into sci-fi, I was into fantasy. I think the first
Yeah.
thing that I loved reading was like the old Dungeon and Dragons and Forgotten Realms books. Um, and then because they're in the same section, you're browsing the fantasy novels and you've read most of them and seeing some sci-fi mixed in there. Um, and one of the first books I picked up was science fiction books was Ender's Game.
Mm,
And I
great
just
book.
remember like it had all these badges on the front of all these awards it had won. And some, I think there was it was in a Walden Books, which I remember because that was my bookstore when I was a kid in a mall. And I think someone in the aisle, it might have been someone who worked there, it could have been someone who had read the book. When I pulled that book out, said like, that's a really good one. That's all I
Yeah.
remember. And I was like, all right. And I went home and started reading about a kid not too dissimilar from my age saving the human race. And I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
just blew my mind. I never read. And
Yeah.
like all the fantasy stuff, it was like, well, that's stuff that was lost in the past and started reading about this future stuff. I'm like, this is stuff that could actually happen. And that there's something about that that really tickled my brain. And after that, I just started reading everything I could grab, like started
Yeah.
reading all the classics.
So are you still writing? I mean, all from, age 12 through college, through all the vagabonding and yacht captaining and everything else. I mean, were you still putting words down somewhere, making stuff up? I mean, what was kind of the
Totally.
genesis there? I mean, I read in one interview that I don't remember if you said it was because you were afraid of failure or something, but I mean, you basically made it sound as though you were having to like convince yourself to actually do something with it instead of just writing it, which I can relate to. I think most writers can relate to that. Is, for some reason we love doing this and we're terrified of actually giving it a chance in the world. But was that what was going on with you with all that?
Yeah, so sharing what I wrote wasn't as big of a problem for me as finishing what I started.
That too. Yeah.
I started like dozens of different novels over the years and lost interest in them and never finished them. But once I write something, um, and maybe it's gotten a little different, but back in the day, like I would write something and just put it on a blog or send it
Hmm.
out to friends and get feedback on it, or I would handwrite a letter or a story and send it to my mom or my dad and get feedback on it. And I got really good encouragement from teachers. I thought of myself as um, there was a period where I was really thought of myself as a artist, like a drawer. I
Hmm.
was doing a lot of pen and ink,
Oh, cool.
and I wanted to go to art school. And I didn't think of myself as a writer, but I wasn't getting any encouragement for my drawing. We'll just like put it out there that my drawing was
Yeah.
terrible. Um, but I would write a story for English class, and my teacher would like um, be super positive about it. And I think I was reading so much back then. I was just
Yeah.
my vocabulary was way ahead of its my age. Uh, in high school, I was writing easily college level. Like when I
Yeah.
got to college and saw people writing, I was like mystified that
Yeah.
people had not picked up more writing skills. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that all my writing and anyone's writing ability really starts with their reading. Doesn't
Yeah.
start with like studying writing or
Yeah.
English class. It just starts with your recreational reading. So
Yeah.
I started getting all this encouragement from teachers, and I started thinking to myself, I just knew that I was a decent writer. I never, I didn't think about it doing it as a career, but it was something I kind of had in my back pocket that when it came time to do an essay or to
Right.
write for English class, that I was going to do pretty good.
Yeah. And so what was it about the Mollified series that got you finishing it and putting it out there? And how old were you when you started doing that? So you were thinking about this stuff when you're roofing at what age?
Oh, like 30 years old. I was
Okay.
32 when I wrote Mollified, which sounds so young to me now that I'm
Right.
47. But
Right.
at the time, I felt so old. Like
Yeah.
it seemed like anybody who had done anything with their lives had done it by then, which is laughable.
Yeah.
I had
That is
friends
another
who were,
weird thing we like do to ourselves. Like, man, I'm in my 30s. I mean, I'm 35 now. I sometimes feel that, it's like, Jesus, like everybody's already done everything. My life is slipping away, but no, it's crazy. I
yeah,
mean,
it's just getting started.
yeah.
My friend, Immortals, who um, wrote the Rules of Civility and Gentleman in Moscow and Lincoln Highway.
Mm.
He probably wrote his first book in his late 40s, early
Yeah. I
50s.
mean, there's no rules or rhyme or reason in any of this stuff. There
Yeah,
really isn't. Yeah.
I we have to just stop kicking ourselves
Yeah.
unless it's motivational.
Right.
Um, for me, it a good might have been a good fire in my belly to feel like I needed to do something more with my
Yeah.
life. Um,
So you're 32, I think you said, when you put out the first Mollified, and
yeah,
you put out a few of those, and then I mean, those were doing okay. I mean, how was that going?
I mean, the
The
first
first
one,
one was with a traditional publisher, right? Small press.
yeah, very small
Yeah.
press, Norlights Press, but I bought the rights back to it really
Mhm.
quickly because I got a contract for the second one for the sequel.
Yeah.
They were thrilled. It was like one of their top selling
Okay.
books, and a lot of that was just because I was on social media, like on Facebook, like telling all my friends about it, and
Yeah.
the handful of people who had read it loved it. I got a couple of big name authors to endorse it. Um, Douglas Preston and Daniel Suarez both
Mhm.
like wrote blurbs for it. And yeah, so it was like doing really well for a small press book.
Yeah.
And I realized, man, I'm doing all the work, getting the blurbs, getting the word out there, like
I mean,
all
that is
the,
like a huge part of your story. Is I mean, you became, one of the main people at the forefront. Maybe, I mean, not the first, but one of the most prominent at the forefront of this, indie publishing, self-publishing sort of boom about a decade ago or so. And I mean, that's something I think a lot of people don't realize about traditional publishing is most authors have to do most of the work to market it and to get it out there. I mean, it's really, I don't want to sound too critical of the model, but it's a really bizarre and confusing business model that they have and way they have going about these things. I mean, not only do you have to write the book, you're responsible also for making sure it sells, which I mean, sure, you should be doing your best to help, but it really does seem like it falls all on you.
it does. It's incredible how much they rely on you to market it. Yeah, and I think people get a little um, jaded after their first, experience with a traditional publisher,
Yeah.
and they realize, uh, you know, the stats are just really awful on how few books most titles sell.
Yeah.
I saw something recently. It was, like 90% of traditionally published books sell dozens of copies,
Right. Yeah.
and
Like it's shockingly bad and
yeah.
low. Yeah.
So the same is true for self-published books, but
Yeah.
the
Of
idea
course.
that the avenues are so different from each other, yeah, is not accurate.
Yeah.
The biggest difference is how much you're going to earn per book sold, which
Yeah.
is an enormous sum,
Yeah. Because that's the other side of the traditional publishing model is the percentage you get on the back end is very low.
very low.
Very low.
Um, I would say like the when it makes sense to traditionally publish is when you have a huge platform and you don't want to You don't care about how much you're going to earn per book, but
Yeah.
you just want to hand it off to someone else. Or if you write something that's going to get you a huge advance and you just
Yeah.
don't want to risk how many books you might sell. Or in my situation, I got to where the amount of money that I was making wasn't as important to me as just having like handing off the work so I could do other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. I mean, it is a lot of work to do self-publishing for sure. Um, But so I want to keep the focus not so much on the inside baseball of publishing as you as a person going through, all this developing this career of yours. I mean, you say you're 32, 33, Molly Fights coming out, you start self-publishing it. I mean, it seems like that's going well enough. What's kind of your routine? Like, how are you going about that? I mean, at that time, are you still roofing? Is this when you're pulling the wires? What's your like day to day? How are you getting the work done while also paying the bills? What's all that like?
So the first book, when I was promoting the first Molly Fied, I did a signing in a bookstore, and I was the only way I was able to just write full time is I had downsized. I had improved the last couple of houses that I lived in and sold them for more than I had paid for.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, and then I downsized massively, convinced my girlfriend at the time, who's not wild about this idea. We moved from a really big house to a house that was 750 square feet,
Wow.
which is almost impossible to design and build a
Right.
house that small.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I was like, I want to live in the smallest.
And
I've been
where are
living with.
you at
This
this
is in North
time?
Carolina, the mountains
Yeah.
of North Carolina,
Which part?
Boone.
Okay. I
So
meant to
we were
say,
working at Appalachian State University.
yeah, I meant to say the jump. I live in Greenville, North Carolina. I
Oh,
was
cool.
just in
Not far.
Charlotte. My family's in Raleigh. Yeah. So
Yeah,
in North
I
Carolina.
grew up in Monroe, outside of Charlotte. So
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
back to North Carolina was going home
Yeah.
for me. So I bought this tiny house that I was actually able to pay cash for. It was like $100,000 for this house,
Yeah.
and we had built up that much equity in our previous homes. And at that, so I'd gotten debt free. I've always hated debt,
Hmm.
and my friends, my brother, my sister, during at this point in my life, they were like, it seemed like they were always in a foreign country. Like my brother would be off in Europe, my sister would be going to like her eighth Madonna concert. Like they were
Yeah.
spending their money doing fun stuff,
Yeah.
which is what you're supposed to do. But I was like not willing to put debt on a credit card. I was trying to pay off everything. Like I would only buy a vehicle if I could pay cash for it. And that aversion to debt got me set up at that point in my life where my cost of living was almost nothing.
Yeah.
Like several $100s a month
Wow.
uh, for utilities and groceries. I had no
Wow.
mortgage, no rent, very low taxes in North Carolina, property
Hmm.
taxes. So I had saved up a little bit, and I knew that I could live off of it for 2 years if I had to, but I didn't want to dip into it. So when I was doing
Right.
this book signing, the manager of the bookstore said, we really hit it off just chatting all day while I was signing books. And he was like, well, I'm getting ready to hire a new assistant. You should put an application in. And I was like, man, I don't know if I'll have time to work in, do all the writing that I want to do. And he was like, it's only 30 hours a week. I only paid $10 an hour, by the way. So I'm looking at like taking a job where I make $300 a
Yeah.
week before taxes.
Yeah.
Um, but I loved being around books. I worked in bookstores at
Yeah.
college, and it seemed like the perfect job. So I put in an application, interviewed, got the job, and I would go on to write the next like 6 or 7 of my published works while I was working at that bookstore.
Yeah. Do you have like an editor you have looking over this, or is it just having friends give it a read? How are you going about all that?
It started off with mostly friends and my mom, and
Hmm.
uh, and I would just send it to anybody online who wanted to like. It's so hard to get people to read stuff.
Yeah.
Um, People think I'm gonna keep this hidden. No one's ever gonna see this. Like, trust me, if you publish it online, no one's still gonna read it. Um, you have to like beg people to read books from an unknown author in a series I've never heard about. Um, these days, I do have a an editor, and I still use like my mom and some of the same friends.
Yeah. Sorry, I just messed up my mic here real quick.
To fix it in post.
Yeah, fix it in post. I feel like my voice sounds like weird and crackly now. Does it sound like that to you?
Yeah, just check your connections and turn your gain up, maybe.
Check what?
Oh, that sounds better.
How about there you go. Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. But yeah, you were saying, yeah, if you put it online, it's not like anybody's necessarily going to read it either. What was that? That sounds better. Okay.
Yeah, you can put it like really close under your chin to see if the distance helps.
How's this?
It still sounds quiet, but
Sounds
you
quiet.
you'll have a good you'll have a good recording on your end.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened. All right.
Yeah, so I still employ like beta readers and amateur editors, but my primary editor these days, my mom who loves reading the first draft as she can and marking it up, and a guy named David Gatewood who actually reached out to me as a fan and told me all the things all the mistakes that I made in wool, like 168 errors. And I read this email. I was like, oh my God, like you're my new editor. I want to pay you for this.
Yeah.
And I think he does it just full time now. Like he was banking, and I started promoting him as a amazing freelance editor. And he got a lot of work from other self-published authors, and now he does it full time.
Great. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with this mic all of a sudden. But okay.
Hey, this is like your first podcast, man. You got to make all the mistakes and
Yeah, well, I'm doing it.
the growing pains.
Yeah. That's the way it goes, right? That's always like you just got to dive in and just screw up over and over again, whatever you're doing. But then, so where all this is leading though is wool, which is you just kind of put up a few chapters, and from what I've read, you told me in the past is you didn't expect a whole lot. You're just putting out the next thing you had an idea for, and you went to working on something else, and then long story short, I mean, it starts selling more and more. So you turn your attention to that. And then, I mean, within a year, you're quitting your job, you're pulling in, you're selling 20, 30,000 copies of the whole wool story a month, pulling in 150,000 a month, I think I saw in one of your old interviews. I mean, it's, boom, your whole world's changed. And now, I mean, it's becoming an Apple Plus TV series, starring some really big names. And you got Rebecca Ferguson, you got Tim Robbins, Rashida Jones, Common. I mean, several others. I mean, it's that's just. I mean, was that? I mean, one that's amazing. Was that kind of the goal for you? I mean, obviously, everybody wants their stuff to sell tons of copies and all that, but I mean, were you doing this thinking, okay, this is going to make me rich and all this, or it was just I love doing this and I'm going to do it?
I mean, I love doing it. I don't think I would have persisted. I was so in love with watching worlds appear on a blank page
Yeah.
that I'd come up with, and seeing characters pop into existence that um, without my imagination and putting the hard work in would never exist.
Yeah, that's something as a kind of sidebar, like in wayfinding, you talked about in college you got addicted to video games
Yeah,
to the
love.
degree that you flunked out, right?
Yeah,
Was that
yeah,
an
and I would say
exaggeration or is that actually what happened?
no, for sure. My first attempt to go to college at UNC Charlotte, I don't. Part of it was the video games. Most of it was just computers. My first, my second stepdad was a computer engineer, and so in 1992, 91 or 92, he came home with like a box of parts and said, look, if I was trying to get him my own computer at the time, he was like, if you want a computer, you have to build one. And he brought home like, motherboard, chip, memory. And this is
Right.
back in the day. Like now, a lot of people build their own computers. And you could just pop things together, power it up, and it probably works. This was at a time when like you had to move dip switches and
Right.
jumpers. You move these little black jumpers between different pins on a motherboard to get the voltages right and to tell
Wow.
the computer like what DRM like what memory to assign to your sound card versus your video card, so you didn't have conflicts.
Oh, wow.
And when you were booting the thing up, like you had to write, an auto exec bat and a config sys file to just make things work. Making the thing turn on and have sound was like a miracle. And then to have enough memory to play a game like Privateer or Doom or whatever the hot game was back then. And so I got, I was so much more in love with playing with my computer and tweaking it and upgrading it and trying to get it to work. It was like playing with a hot rod back then.
Yeah.
That I would just sit in my dorm room all day doing that and helping other people with their computers. So I went from going to school to being like a structural engineer. I was like trying to build bridges. My first attempt at a career was like I was going to go build bridges. And instead, I was building computers. I flunked out and went to computer school instead and started like learning more about computers. And then my first job after that, like, was working at a Tandy computer repair center. So that was going to be my career. I was going to work on computers my whole life.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. So the idea I was having originally before that rabbit hole was, you wrote in wayfinding, you look for things to replace like the unhealthy things or the things that you felt like weren't helping you, that were causing maybe regret for not doing the things you wanted to do. And that's something that you said was like, instead of picking up a video game, let's sit down and write some scenes. Let's
So that,
create a world. And so that's kind of what you're talking about. Is like, that's just what you love doing.
yeah,
It's just seeing stuff appear on the page.
I hear this from people all the time, and I heard it from myself back then that I had these dreams of like writing more than write like 2 books a year and get better at writing novels and maybe try to make a career out of it. And I was like, oh, how would I ever find the time to do that? And that's the lament that you hear from a lot of aspiring writers. They don't have the time. And then I looked at my daily routine and I was like, oh, here are 2 hours a day that I could carve out.
Yeah.
I could do it by waking up. If you go to bed a little earlier and wake up earlier, you can get some hours where no one else is going to bother you.
Yeah.
If you try to do it later in the day, there's always going to be a distraction. There's other people up. But if you can force yourself to sleep a little earlier, add that hour or two to the start of your day and devote that just to writing. And if you can make that a daily routine where you never miss a day, in a year, you write 2 novels without even trying. It just happens. But you have to be completely consistent. You have to develop that schedule for yourself,
Yeah. And so as the wool thing takes off and you start, you quit your job, you start focusing on this, completely full time. And that's when, publishers start coming to you and they're offering you 6, 7 figures for the rights to all this. And you're saying no, because you want to hang on to the self-publishing digital ebook rights and all that. And I don't know if had anybody ever made a deal like that before that you know of?
I doubt that anyone had ever turned down some of the deals that I was turning down without any previous publishing. For one thing, I had an agent who was willing to say no, and that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
But it was easier than maybe even I've made it out to be. It's less heroic when you're making the kind of money that I was making on my own. And really it was the publisher's fault for always coming in with a low offer. Like, if I would have gotten the offer that I got in June, if I would have gotten that in January, I probably would have taken it.
Right.
But by June, my income was going up faster than the offers were going up.
Yeah.
So what became like, a $50,000 advance turned into 100, turned into 250, turned into $1 million. Like, they were always just moving so slowly. And meanwhile, readers were pushing the sales of the series into the stratosphere. So it was always kind of easy to say no, just looking at my monthly income versus what they were offering me for lifetime earnings.
Yeah.
I just wasn't willing to take the chance that these publishers were going to sell more copies of the book than I was able to.
Yeah. Hi. So one thing real quick, the show has a sponsor now, Rogue Energy, rogueenergy.com. They make energy drinks in the form of basically these powder packs that you drop into some water, shake them up, and basically work like an energy drink. 0 to 5 calories, sugar free, gluten free, soy free, vegan, vitamins, antioxidants, amino acids, all kinds of good stuff. If you go to rogueenergy.com, you can get free samples. And if you sign up for their email, you actually get 25% off. If you want another 10% off, use my discount code SNEED, SNEED. That's at rogueenergy.com. Great energy drinks in the form of these powder packets. They got lots of great flavors: a blue raspberry, fruit punch, strawberry lemonade, all kinds of things. So, rogueenergy.com. Go check them out. And for an extra 10% off whatever you get, use my discount code SNEED, SNEED. Thank you.
I mean, you keep writing other books and all that from there. But from what I remember from following, just your career over the years, is it seems like there were these ongoing conversations with various producers and such in LA and elsewhere about turning Wool, I think it was, into, something, movie, TV series, whatever. And it seemed like you kind of fairly quickly decided a lot of talk is going to happen around this and it may well never happen. And then, last year, I think it was, they went into production on it.
Yeah, the crazy thing, it started the first person to get the rights to Wool was Ridley Scott and Steve Zalian, which is like
Oh yeah.
the
Wow.
top duo in science fiction.
Yeah.
Um, and we were going to do a feature film, and they had the rights for about 5 years and kept working on different drafts and assigning, attaching different directors. But we got the rights back maybe 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and started aiming for TV instead. And that's when it's been a crazy journey because like our first deal was with AMC, and then Apple, who was in the final consideration, they partnered up with AMC and said, "Hey, we'd like to be a part of this and help finance it if we can, distribute on Apple Plus." And they ended up going in together, and like AMC being the creative side and Apple being the distribution and financing um, backer. And yeah, it's just been like nothing's been a like a straight route for this. It's just been all over the
Yeah.
place. But now we've wrapped the first season and working on getting the second season underway. So it's been, it's been crazy watching it come together.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I mean, you talk about you're a vagabond. I mean, what do at one point you sail around the world, right? And what else are you doing along the way? Because you're also still writing, you're working on other things. And how is this, I guess, enabling you to live, the life that you feel like you really wanted? What else are you
Yeah,
doing with
the
everything?
sailing adventure is something I've been dreaming of since I was a little kid. I've grew up. I was a sailor before I was a writer,
Mm,
and a professional yacht captain before I was a paid author. So I've always thought of myself as a sailor first and a writer second.
yeah.
As soon as I had um, all the success I'd wanted as a writer, and when the promotional work got just really a grind, it became so all consuming, doing book tours and saying yes to every speaking engagement, responding to every fan email. I needed to like retire in order to not hurt anyone's individual feelings by saying no. I need to say no to
Right.
everybody. So when I turned 40, I retired from all the writing responsibilities and built a boat, just took off around the world. And
Yeah.
man, just went from kind of draining myself to filling myself back up, and got, you know, back to who I was before all the writing success started turning me into like a complete workaholic.
Right.
And now I'm writing again and publishing again, but have a much better life balance. Like spending time with my friends and doing things that make me happy is a much higher priority than it was back when I was terrified if I stopped, I would never be able to start my career up again. And that's why I
Oh
was
yeah.
working so hard, at the time.
Yeah. What a what a, I guess, metaphor, right? As you start off as a sailor and then become a yacht captain, and that's such a grind. You need to do something else, and then you end up becoming a writer and finding all that success, and that becomes such a grind. You gotta go do something else, and so you're back to basically being a captain, just this time it's your own boat, and you're doing your own thing. That seems really cool.
You know, people thought that I was living the life when I was working as a yacht captain,
Mm,
and it was amazing. It was an incredible adventure, but it's not your boat.
right,
You are going where someone else directs you. You're kind of gazing over the rails at the things that you wished you could do if it was your boat.
right.
There's a lot of similarities to what it feels like when you're uh, publishing with a major publisher. Uh, I've always resisted that feeling of being like hemmed in and being told what to do. Like I've always wanted to just even if it was a mistake or if I was gonna um, you know uh, injure myself physically or have regrets or mess something up, I kind of always wanted to try things out on my own and learn that way. So getting off of um, yachts and getting onto my own boat was like one of the best feelings I've ever had. Getting out of that first publishing contract and publishing myself and doing everything like laying out the interior of the book myself and doing all the cover art and assigning myself a UPC code and putting that on the back of the book, like little things like that were just fit my personality. Just felt amazing
Yeah,
compared to having a publisher say, what we really need is another book in this series. So write the
right,
same thing over and over again.
right.
Or the owner of a yacht saying, like, we want to go, we want to go from Key West to Fort Lauderdale for a year, just bouncing
Mhm.
between these two places. Like that kind of routine is when like boredom sets in for me and yeah, so a big part of my life has been like just trying to break out of that.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people crave that direction, like do this, and like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah, and I've told people like my path is not reproducible.
right.
You're going to find success in a different way than I did, um, but it's also not desirable. Like a lot of people would be
Mhm.
miserable doing all the things that I went through to get to where I am.
That's stressful.
Yeah. So
That's just a
for me, it
lot.
was like relaxing and
Mhm.
I think for everybody has to make like the to take the path of least resistance for themselves.
Yeah.
For me, my path of least resistance involves what looks like a lot of friction and resistance to other people.
Yeah.
Like I kind of embrace challenge and embrace hardship and want to push myself and
Mhm.
see where my limits are. And I find happiness in that direction. And a lot of people are like me. Like I've met a lot of my friends who've determined what to do in life by asking themselves, what's the thing I least want to do right now?
Yeah.
Like what's the most challenging to me? And
Yeah.
that's what is asking me to like tackle it.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot to this idea of, I mean, and you even, I think, right about this in the wayfinding is like, trying to be happy all the time isn't going to make you actually have a happy life, and it's the idea that, we got to choose our suffering. We can't just try to avoid it all the time. It's like you got to lean into the stuff that's, scaring you or challenging you because it's there for some reason. You don't always know why, until maybe after the fact. That's something I got a great therapist. He always tells me, he's like, understand it later. Right now, you just got to live it. Understand it when you're old. Just go do the things you think you got to do. And it sounds like that's more or less what you were doing
That's
too.
great advice. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's always been my like Achilles heel. It's a double-edged sword, right? It's good to learn, but if you get stuck on trying to understand everything all the time, I mean, you're going to paralyze yourself. Um, but yeah, what's going on? I mean, we started talking earlier. I mean, you meet Shay like 3 months ago. You guys get engaged at Burning Man. At sunset, you just have this incredible picture on your Instagram and all that of you're kneeling in the middle of the sculpture. I mean, you set it up perfectly. What's the name of that sculpture? Because it's incredible.
I think
It's
it's called Love. Well, it's a whole series by this
yeah,
sculptor out of Lisbon, Michael. I can't remember his last name. I've actually been chatting with him. Um, I want to. we might go to Lisbon soon. I want to go see his studio.
What was
Um,
can you walk me through the genesis of basically that? I mean, we got like 15 minutes here. And so this is, the culmination of all this crazy shit that's happening. Is so, you meet Shay, I guess 3 months ago. How does that happen? And how does that lead to you, proposing to her at Burning Man in front of because
I
this
need we need an hour to try to
yeah,
get just the
I know.
short
I wanted
version
to
of
try to
that.
get into this earlier, but
So it doesn't,
so
none of it sounds real, but I'll give you the rundown.
all right.
So I was going to an event in Italy, in Tuscany, that three friends were putting this gathering together at one of their castles, basically on a hill in Tuscany. It already sounds ridiculous. So I was going to this event, and getting there was difficult. So people were looking for rides, and I had rented a car in Tuscany before they all rented out because of this huge fashion thing that was descending on the city. So I had a big SUV, and I said, as many people can pile in, can pile in.
Mm.
So I met this amazing guy and his girlfriend in Tuscany. We had lunch together, and we'd already agreed that I was going to drive them to this event, and we hit it off like immediately, like total bromance. Incredible art collector, just brilliant mind, and super nice guy. And we walk around the city a little bit. We have a couple of hours driving to this castle south of town, and while we're hitting it off, he's like, what are you doing next? What have you got coming up? And I told him I was heading to the Arctic to look for polar bears. And I was like, I've got a extra spot on the boat if you want to join me. We'd be like living in a little cabin together, but we've hit it off. And he was like, I can't, but my best friend would love to go. She's dying to find polar bears. And I was like, okay, but like, don't try to set me up. Like, I had just gotten out of an engagement in January, like 6 months before. And I was so not interested in dating. Like, for
Yeah.
the first time, I think in my life, I wasn't thinking about romantic attachments at all. I was just spending time with friends, traveling, writing, adventuring. I wasn't on any apps. I wasn't looking to be with anybody.
Right.
And
Always happens, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And but it's hard to like force yourself not to, it's easy to
Yeah.
tell people like it'll happen when you don't want it, but you can't just not want it. You
You
have
can't
to
make
be in a
yourself not want it. Like
exactly. You have
it's
to be in a
not
place where
really
you
it's not a
really
yeah, it's not a choice. It's
it's
something
not a
like that.
choice. It's
Yeah.
a chemical state of mind.
Yeah.
So I met his best friend Shay, and she was cute, but it wasn't the thing that really jumped out at me at the time. I was really overwhelmed with a lot of other stuff going on at this event.
Yeah.
But I told, she within 5 minutes, she was like, sure, send me the details. So I sent her the details. She read up on it and like booked a flight immediately. And she was like, yeah, let's go. So, and this was a thing that my friend Carlos had told me about Shay, is like, she's like you, she's a total adventurer. She'll say yes to anything.
Mm.
So now a few weeks go by, we're not really talking. We're just, going about our lives, but this event gets closer, and there's a bunch of airline strikes, and the company is really worried about getting us to Svalbard, really remote part of the world. So they're like, we chartered a plane, everyone get to Paris. And when I got that email, I was already in Paris visiting friends. So I was like, well, this is easy. And Shay had lived in Paris before, back when she was a model, and she had friends there she could stay with. So she just flew down. So our next time hanging out was this amazing day in Paris. Like, we met in the morning and spent all day just going to museums and walking and eating meals. And we were just laughing the whole time. And I realized, oh my God, like, this person's incredible. What, like, how are they single hanging out with me? She was probably thinking the same thing. And by the end of that day, I was thinking, like, we should just get our first kiss out of the way. Like, we should go to the Eiffel Tower and have a romantic first kiss in Paris.
Right.
And I found out later we were both thinking that,
Right.
but it didn't happen. And I was still resistant to the idea of like dating somebody.
Yeah.
So we get on a boat. We fly to Svalbard, the northernmost city in the world. We get on this
Mm.
tiny boat. Well, tiny for the living quarters. Like, we're sharing
Right.
a little room together. There's only 12 passengers on the boat. and we spend the next 2 weeks like looking for polar bears and absolutely falling in love with one another.
Mm.
And by the time we got off the boat, we were how are we going to continue this? How are we going to live together? How are we going to spend the rest of our lives together? um the engagement was like a foregone conclusion at that point. Like we
Yeah.
already knew we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. By the time I asked her to marry me, she was already asking her mom, like, should I ask him? Like, so she didn't expect it that day in that moment,
Yeah.
but it wasn't a surprise to either one of us. Like we've
Yeah.
known really for a long time that this is our dream match. Like
Yeah.
I could go for an hour with all the ways that we're
Yeah.
perfectly um, meant to be together.
That's kind of the
So that's
benefit
our
of,
story.
yeah, I mean, you nailed that like 6 minutes. That was incredible. No, that's kind of the benefit, I mean, of, having experience though, and going through a bunch of stuff that you would have rather not, is once you're around the kind of person, I would imagine that like like what's good for you and what's not by that point. You know what feels good and healthy. And so I mean, it sounds fast as hell, but I mean there's also a lifetime of experience building up to that. So in a way it's not. In a way it's your whole life shows you what's
Exactly.
best.
And so since Paris, like we've been together 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so, 2 weeks, also the 2 weeks in the Arctic, like we had no internet, no cell phone.
Yeah.
And we're surrounded by friends who are also like a part of our adventure together.
So
And
you really, I mean, you probably got a good 6 months to a year's worth of bonding jammed into
exactly,
that, like with no distractions with the internet and all that. You got all your friends around you. I mean, so I mean, that's what takes dating and all that so long, is it takes a long time just to get to know somebody's world and people and vibe. And like, I mean,
totally,
you're crammed on a boat in the Arctic, kind of get to know somebody pretty quick.
very quickly.
That's amazing. And tell us about this sculpture. Cause I mean, it's just the visual is, incredible. And then the caption you posted and the meaning behind it was, just fantastic. What did that mean to y'all?
It's one of the most beautiful pieces of work I've ever seen.
Yeah.
There was 400 pieces of art on the playa this year, and this was by far the one that spoke to me the most. And you know, it's easy to project your own life experience into the art, like we do that when we
Yeah.
listen to music. Like everything's about what's happening to me now.
Yeah.
But it's obvious what this work represents, and it's a universal kind of feeling. So a lot of other people looking at it were thinking the same thing. Um, but you got these two figures standing there, and there are parts of them missing, like parts of
Hmm.
their arms, huge chunks of their torsos, their legs, these horrible wounds that are,
Hmm.
jagged and obviously not meant to, not part of their original design.
Hmm.
Um, and yet the way they're standing, you can fill in with your eyes the rest of their shape and their posture and the way their chests are out and their heads are up and they're looking at each other. They evoke such power and confidence and optimism. And there's something about that dichotomy of seeing these two damaged, wounded people who have this, like, are just exuding love for one another. And you're like, whoa, what the fuck is going on with this? Like, this, um, this crazy mashup.
Yeah.
And, and you realize like we carry these damaged, wounded parts of us forward into our relationships, but the ability to like be with the right person and um, have optimism and be full of love for each other while you have all these scars. Oh
Yeah.
man, it was like totally what Shay and I are going through, and what a lot of other people are going through. And it's what art should do, make you think about those things and make you
Yeah.
feel emotional. And I get choked up
Yeah.
just talking about it. But when you see this piece of person, it was really off to the side, and was hard to find. By the end of Burning Man, there was always a crowd around it. More and more people started discovering it and falling in love with it.
Yeah.
And I think it became a favorite.
Is that your first time Burning Man?
It was only my second, but
Yeah.
yeah, both times I've done build week as well. So I would go out for
Okay.
like, do 2 full weeks. I don't just like show up for a day.
Yeah.
Like I go and like get blisters and breathe playa dust for for a
Sure.
full week before the
Yeah.
party starts.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking this time. I know you're busy as hell. Any parting thoughts, questions, concerns,
That
anything
is
you want to
actually
share that
perfect
we haven't?
timing. I hear a neighbor starting to do some construction work, so you're going to get all kinds of background noise next.
Yeah, good deal. Well, any parting advice for anybody trying to do what you've done?
Yeah, follow your passions and your heart, and try to ignore professional advice, especially if it's coming from me. Um, there's so many new paths to finding an audience, but you've got to create content in complete silence. Not worry about what kind of success you're having early on. You've got to be able to endure the anonymity of those early years and just keep creating. And if you can enjoy that part of the process, then the rest will come. If that part's miserable for you, go get a 9 to 5 or do something else.
Yeah, good deal, man. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks again, Hugh, for being here and taking the time. Check out his work at hughhowey.com. And thank you for being here and listening. And again, show notes, bonus material, and a lot more by subscribing to my newsletter at brandonsneed.com. And we'll be back next week with another one. So check back then. More soon. Thanks, y'all.